Okay, the sword forge is in the house with the silicone curing. It's actually about maybe 90 pounds, so I was able to bring it in the basement without too much trouble versus the 300, 400 pound thing it was when I built the first one. So now I've got, here, I'll switch the camera around. I've got this other tube here, and this is going to be the quench tank for quenching the blades. And it's just right under 5 feet where it is. So since I can heat up 5 foot of blade, I want a tank that will quench 5 foot of blade. Like I said, this is the flamberge and the claymore maker. I may never make one. I may make 1 or 2. I might make 20. You never know. At least now I have the capability of doing it. It's way... The setup I have with that sword forge and this is kind of overkill for that patah blade, being over only 25 inches long. But when you see me heat treat that thing versus painting it through a little or gas forge, the efficiency is without question. Truly, I don't believe it'll take more than 20 minutes to heat that blade up and quench it. And I can just let it idle away over in the corner and kind of do it passively. Anyway, so we have the tube and we have a base plate for it because you don't want like 10 gallons of oil to tip over. In the house I have all the oil, so it's actually warm enough to flow. It's still negative temperatures. We got a little bit of snow. And then something I employed on my other quench tank. Again, like the sword forge, I wish I never would have scrapped it. But I'm going to weld a fitting on, and then I also learned to put an elbow on the end of it on the bottom of that tank so I can drain the oil out. Because if something stupid happens, like, oh, I've missed something in a weld and it starts leaking out the weld, which can happen. I'm trying to hold oil on very dirty material. I'll do my best to clean it and everything. But let's say there's only one way I can test that, and that's to put oil in it. I could try water, but oil is thinner than water. The real test for anything is if you put diesel fuel in it and it holds it, or hydraulic fluid. So let's say something goes bad with the weld. Well, now I have the option to just drain it into a pan and avert most of the disaster. Clean it up, burn it out, use acetone to clean it, drill out whatever pinhole it is, and then fix it. That's why the idea for the drain. If I ever need to replace the quenching solution because it gets grinder dust and yucky in it, or worse, what can happen in these temperatures? What happens with a can of pop in the summertime? It's the condensation on the outside of the can. Well, the same can happen to a pipe in the winter on the inside. And that can get oil or water in your quenching oil. And being 5 foot deep, you know, it's probably not too much of an issue for most swords. But if, let's say, I own this thing for 3 or 4 years, and down here in the bottom, the condensation keeps piling. 1, it can freeze and rupture. 2, let's say it gets all the way up to here without me noticing it or without it failing. Now when I do a quench on a claymore, and I stuff that in there, now that blazing orange 1500 degree tip of that sword hits water instead of oil. Granted, it's got to go through all that oil first, but the smallest chance that it could shatter because of being water quenched when it's an oil quenching steel, that worries me. So I want to be able to, every 6 months or so, 3 months, crack that valve into a drain pan and see if there's water that comes out. And then the other factor is I want to make a lid. Simply put, 98% of my swords will fit in there entirely. And if I devise a way of using a wire to hook it to the top so it centers, then I can slam the blade in, you know, put the cap on and contain most of the smoke. And I can also keep any inadvertent moisture outside if I'm because I'm going to have to heat treat with that bad boy outside. I'm going to have to wheel it outside with a dolly. If it's drizzling or something, I shouldn't really be tempering that day anyway, but something like pine needles and everything else, it'll just keep it out there for the brief time it's out there. It'll keep that out. And in here, it'll keep grinder dust and stupid stuff. And, well, it is semi-flammable, so I want a lid on it. I'm still debating on how to do this valve. My first inclination was that plate there and just welding it on the bottom and then going up so far the height of a drain pan and sticking that in. But that would leave like a gallon, maybe 2 gallons of oil in this. But if I cut a circle, weld it in, then take a piece of that extra I got there, the depth of my drain pan, cut a notch out of the end so the pipe can fit through. Then I put a hole in the middle of the plate here, tighten that pipe in there. Then whatever direction it sticks out, slide that little adapter collar in. Then I can weld my plate onto that. And I've basically got kind of a ridge like on this propane tank where the drain valve can stick out the side. And I've maybe only added 8 inches to my overall height, which is still as tall as I am. I'll have to use that step ladder to quench. But then I can completely drain the oil tank. And the way it's designed, there's some protection for that valve, as well as it not being able to tip over very easy. So that's kind of my game plan. It's going to be a little complicated because I don't have all the pieces designed yet. But I'll just get started and we'll work on it as we go. And then by the time I'm done, that caulking should be cured on the sword forge. Whenever I'm welding a tank like this, I find it advantageous to keep leaks at a minimum, to start to weld it all flat, but you can only do that on a certain part of the radius here. Sorry about the camera. So now that I've welded part of it, if I start here, see where the wire's at, tie in there, this won't leak right there. But if I come here and try on the end, there's a possibility it'll leak. This right here is the hottest part of this piece of steel right now. It's the best place to start the tie-in for wire feed on this kind of stuff anyway. Okay, here's the basic tube. And then, of course, there's a bottom under here. This is just a cowl to support it and protect the valves. And because I want a nice good base on it, I'm going to plasma cut a hole here. And I'll probably weld a ring on up higher. And if I ever need to change oil, I'll just take it out to my chain hoist, raise it up, crack the valve into an oil pan, and just go that way. Otherwise, I'd have added another 8 inches to the height, and I just didn't want to do that. I'm already going to have to use a step ladder every time I quench something in it, so. Future reference, thinking about it. Might be advantageous to make a shorter one, but why? I mean, it's a 20-minute job at most that has to be done on blades. So why not just be ready for anything and climb the ladder and do it right? Okay, so here's kind of a close-up of what's going on. I welded that. I first cut it up. I welded it. I cut out the hole so I can reach up inside and change any of the fittings or spruce them up or tighten them or whatever I have to do if I need to later. And then there's a drain hole in the plate. As I said, I still have to weld some kind of ring on here, but I was gonna lay it on the sawhorses and show you what it looks like up in there. As promised, there's a look up at the maintenance cavity, I guess we could call it. I can just drain out the oil and check it and make sure it's not leaking. Or I can fix it if it rusts out or something stupid. Okay, we've got it done. I have to still test it for leaks. But as I said, I've got a lifting ring for my chain hoist. If I ever have to do empty it, then I can they're opposing corners so they get wide enough. The valve on the bottom and the ring are at opposing corners so that I can lift it up and it'll drain out effectively. Shouldn't make too much of a difference. It's in the middle anyway. But as far as the lid, we went simple stupid. Why fabricate something you can buy for $6? That'll keep grinder dust out. My quenching medium is 3 parts motor oil to 1 part diesel fuel. So I've got it measured out. I need exactly 27 quarts of oil and 2.25 gallons of diesel. So I'm going to pour just a little bit of that diesel down in the bottom, and that'll tell me if it's going to leak, and I'll proceed with caution from there. Okay, that ought to be enough to tell me if it leaks. If I see, I was very careful not to spill any. So if I see a leak on the floor under that, now I know it's either my thread tape or my welder leaking. Got water over here with a little bit of oil from something else, but the quench tank has no leaks. Very happy to report, and it's full. See if we can see in there. Yeah, you can see the depth of the oil. It's full of the quenching solution. It took every bit of all those jugs and the stuff I had on hand for doing knives that was in those old refrigerator trays down there to fill it. But that's ready. Kind of spooky to move. I might have to drain some out. But with all the talk about hardening swords, I never told anybody how to soften one yet. And the way you soften a piece of metal is you heat it up to the critical temperature, 1500 degrees. Then you bury it in sand or ashes or vermiculite, something like that. Anything that will take the heat and as well as hold the heat. But as you can see, this is nowhere near long enough for a sword blade. But that is. That's a propane cylinder cut off on the, or cut in half both ways and welded together in the middle. And then the band on the bottom, I cut in half to make the legs for it. Now I'm debating, I might as well just pour my sand in there and see how much I got, because I have some sand back there I was going to use to build the refractory lining to fix the blast furnace over here. But since it's there, burying steel in it's not going to hurt it for that purpose. So I'm going to take all the sand I got and lay it in there and see if it's enough to cover the blade well. And down the road I'm going to use vermiculite or perlite because it's so much lighter. That's already pretty heavy. What if I want to move it? If I fill that with sand, then we get it back up into the 400 to 500 pound machines I build. But I'll just real quick dump that in there and spread it out. So there it is with some sand in the bottom of it. That's probably going to be enough. I'll take that sand, put it in a bucket to pour over it when it's done, or when it's hot. Then I can just lay it in there. I don't have to, you know, let's say this was a sword, this jack handle or a dagger. If I lay that in there and I'm going like this to cover it, there's a good chance I'm just going to waste a lot of time and burn my fingers. But if I have some in a bucket and I can just pour it on smooth, that works a lot more efficiently. And we'll get this out of the way again. Now I have another pan for something else. And I'll pull my toolbox forward. So the idea here might be to the gas forge being, the sword forge being put here, the quench tank here, though I don't like that because my garage door's in the way. It'd keep it oiled though. Yeah, too many wires up there. And then either way, with the sword forge being here and the hot box being here, I can just pull stuff out and lay it in the hot box and then cover it. That concludes the quench tank. And I threw this in here. I built it. I didn't do a build video on it. It's pretty straightforward. But when you heat up the piece of steel to critical temperature, you're either going to soften it in sand or some other like medium, or quench it into the correct liquid for hardening. Kind of both ends of the spectrum.